say the 23rd Psalm?
The world is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me to lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside the still water. He restores my soul. He leads me in the path of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou with me. The rod and thy staff, they comfort me. It's just a palace the table before me in the presence of my enemies. I anoint my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life. I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever.
Two ways we know that was from the South, because she was reciting it in the King James, and plus her accent. I just love that one. It took me back to the times when we lived in Tennessee. But if you're new, or if you haven't been here last week, you know that I told the group that I went down a rabbit hole of cute kids reciting the 23rd Psalm, and just wanted to share a few of those with you, and I love that one. Last week I also mentioned that I talked about this movie about Babe the Talking Pig, who was actually a shepherd pig. And there's a movie based on it, and it just has great application to what we're talking about in the 23rd Psalm. But little did I know that last Thursday night, the Primetimer group would be watching that. And so I watched Babe again last Thursday night. Now, I had to leave before the movie was over. So I'm not sure if they liked it or not. In fact, as I was watching it, I was reminded that it's kind of a dark movie. Like, it has some really dark undertones in it. But anyway, just a symbolism of it. You know, when Jesus said, "I am the good shepherd, my sheep know my name, I know my sheep," and just what that movie's all about, I just thought was really, really good. Jesus said, "I lay down my life for the sheep because I am the good shepherd." And so I think it was probably as David, during his shepherding days, he was probably thinking about this as he wrote this, reflecting back on his life in a very personal way, when he started this great psalm by saying, "The Lord is my shepherd." Last week, we talked about how to say the Lord is my shepherd is kind of an unusual declaration of dependence. For Americans, we like our independence, and yet when we say, or when we claim the Lord is my shepherd, what we are saying is that the Lord has a claim to ownership over my life, that I am his, and that I belong to him. We talked about last week how sheep are a very valuable resource, and so especially back then they would mark their sheep so that they would not be able to, they wouldn't lose them. And so we talked about how in David's time the way they marked their sheep was that each shepherd would have its own individual type of a notch that they would carve in the sheep's ear, and so they could look into a group if the sheep were mingling with other sheep from other places, that they would be able to say, "Hey, that's my sheep, that's my sheep." And about how the New Testament has this very kind of strange sort of idea that we are really, as Christians, if we claim to be Christians, that we are kind of marked by our relationship with Christ. And the Bible talks about this idea of that we bear our crosses, that is kind of how we're marked. And sometimes we bear our crosses and it brings sometimes painful suffering or difficulty, but if we trust in the Lord, if we're dependent upon the shepherd to watch out over us and to patiently lead us back when we wander away, there's great comfort in that. I think it must be really, really hard for Jesus to watch sometimes as sort of we get marked as his people through pain and through suffering, as these get burned and pierced and notched into our lives at times. And yet he is our shepherd, and he knows us, and we know him. And really, I don't care how you cut it, to be identified as a Christian is really a badge of honor, to be identified as a sheep of his flock, as one who bears his name, and as one who admits that he has every right to own us because he created us. And we got to get mixed up on that sometimes, I think. Sometimes we think that God exists for our benefit, for our pleasure, but we need to clearly understand that God created us for his pleasure and for his benefit. We exist for him and not the other way around. Now, don't get me wrong, like God does stuff for us and he wants to bless us. That's what this whole psalm is about. And yet we kind of get confused and we think that God is there to do whatever we need him to do and want him to do, except when we're too busy to paying attention to him. But he created us as a shepherd who walks with us. He's not some sort of despotic, distant deity, but he is a shepherd who walks with us through life, through the valleys, through the hills. And this is what this psalm is about. But we need to make sure that we're very clear that we exist for God's good pleasure and not the other way around. The great saint from the early church, Augustine, said, idolatry is worshiping anything that ought to be used and using anything that is meant to be worshiped. And sometimes we sort of have this in our society, our culture. In the Western church, we have this sort of transactional idea of God. The God, I'll serve you. But if I serve you, then that means that you're going to do this, that, and the other thing for me. And that's just not how God would relate to us as our shepherd. In fact, I love the way David puts it in another psalm, Psalm 27. He says, one thing I have asked of the Lord. One thing that I have asked of the Lord is that I will seek after, is that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to gaze upon the beauty of the Lord. You see, our pleasure, our blessings, our gift in life is not what the shepherd brings us, but it's the shepherd himself. And we get confused on that sometimes. But I think it's because of this, all of these things that David wrote, because this Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He refreshes my soul. Today I want to look at verses 1 through the first part of verse 3. And I like to look at other translations. In fact, this past week I went through and I made a spreadsheet of about 9 or 10 different translations and how they render the 23rd Psalm. And for this part of the 23rd Psalm, these first 3 verses, I really, really like the New Living Translation. And it puts it like this: the Lord is my shepherd. I have all that I need. He lets me rest in green meadows. He leads me beside peaceful streams, and he renews my strength. There are other versions that say he makes me lie down in green pastures. And that's from the NIV. And if you've been used to the NIV, if you've grown up on that, there was always that kind of that word there that we seem kind of odd to us, that the Lord makes us do that. Like we don't like anybody to make us do anything. And yet it says that he makes us lie down. But that's a very sticky word. We don't like anybody to make us do something, especially to rest, right? What kind of reaction do you get from your young child when you tell them it's time for a nap? They usually don't say, oh, great, awesome, I want to go for a nap. They don't usually do that. We just don't. We don't like to rest. And sometimes, if we're honest with ourselves, sometimes we can't, even if we want to. See, our shepherd knows how busy our lives can be. But he also knows that we need a respite from all the worries and concerns and crises which can weigh us down. And so there are times when a good shepherd, and we'll talk more about it in a moment, but when a good shepherd literally forces the sheep to rest. And about how he has to make conditions right for these sheep to be able to rest. But let me first say, I don't know what's going on, everything in your life. I don't know what it is that might be causing you to not rest, or to wake up in the middle of the night, or just to make you tired and exhausted. But I can tell you kind of what's going on in my life right now, and I'm not going to lie. It's been an exhausting few months as we're getting ready to move all the way to Perry in a few weeks. And if you've ever moved, you know that it's mind-boggling. There's so much to be done. Not only that, but you live in a house for 20 years and you have so much stuff. The word stuff, I'm putting it kindly. Like, that's really not what it is. It's stuff. But I don't know if you remember, was it last spring we had a 30-yard dumpster parked right there. It was so attractive. I know everybody loved it. We filled that thing up, and yeah, we can tell that we made a dent, but there's so much more. And so just this idea of not only buying the house, but getting ready to move, and we hadn't even started moving yet, and I am worn out. So our desire was to buy a house when we could finally buy a house after 32 years of marriage, because we just figured that probably when we're 75 and 80, you're not going to let us live in that house anymore, right? We got to move on from there. And so we were looking at Perry because we wanted to get a little bit closer to Lansing, as some of you know, and there's a reason I'm telling you this, but for 15 years, Lori drove to Lansing and back from here, twice a day, an hour each way, and I literally don't know how she did it. And so our goal was, when we buy a house, to get a little bit closer to Lansing. But it's also exhausting for me because it's kind of sad. It's a little bit sad to leave our home of 20 years. Well, we'll talk a little bit later in the series about the difference between a house and a home, but that's been our home for 20 years. We raised our kids there, have all kinds of memories there, and it's just exhausting. But I bring all this up partly to say I want to reiterate that our buying a house and moving to Perry has nothing to do with the fact that we're leaving the church. We're not leaving anytime soon. And so I just want to make sure that everybody understands that, okay? I've heard some things, and I'm just letting you know that we are not leaving the church anytime soon. But as you know, if you've ever been through this, it's exhausting. In fact, I can't hardly stay awake past 8 o'clock at night anymore. You ask my wife, she'll tell you the same thing. Like I am worn out. It's time for a nap right now. I'm starting to nod off on myself. And so what I'm saying is, if I fall asleep as I'm preaching, I've always forgiven you. So I'm just saying that you can afford me that same courtesy, right? But our shepherd knows that there are times when we just won't rest until we collapse. And so the shepherd, our God, makes us lie down. I'm going to be referring frequently throughout this series to a book. Many of you have probably read it, but it came out about 50 years ago. A great book written by Philip Keller, who spent a large part of his life as a shepherd. And so he wrote this book, A Shepherd Looks at the 23rd Psalm. I don't know of any better book to relate the 23rd Psalm to our lives than this book. And so again, I'm going to be referring to it. But in this book, he says that for the sheep to rest, a shepherd has to basically provide 4 things to enable the sheep to feel like they can lay down. The shepherd must provide the sheep with freedom from fear and conflict and irritation and hunger. And so in terms of freedom from fear, now, as we've said, and you probably know this, and sometimes it may be overblown, but sheep are not the most intelligent animals. However, they have a very fine-tuned danger radar. Like they know when they are in danger, and they can sense it, and they will not rest until they're safe. And their only defense against a predator is to run. And so they'll stay on their feet until they can be sure that there's no danger, and they'll walk back and forth. And the good shepherd will have to provide safety for them from fear if they're going to sleep. If they don't, if they do not find rest from freedom from fear, they'll restlessly roam around. They'll grow dangerously thin, looking for safe havens where at last they can lay down. And even if there isn't a valid threat on the horizon terrorizing them, they don't understand that. They will get skittish by anything, a stray dog, a rabbit. Anything can make them afraid. They have the same level of fear for a dog as they do for a wolf. And I saw that a few years ago. It's not the same situation, but I was on a summer day riding my motorcycle, and I was riding on Kirby Road. And I'm just, there's hardly ever any cars on there, and so I'm driving down that road, but I see ahead of me, approaching me, it looks like it, could it be? There was a lady walking her pet sheep, I guess. I don't know. There was a lady walking toward me with a sheep on a leash. And so I thought, because I'm such an expert on sheep now, because I'm preaching this series, I thought, man, that sheep is going to be terrified if I go roaring past him on my motorcycle. And so I had all this planned out very carefully, that as I approached, I would pull on my clutch and I would try to just like coast as silently and as quietly as I could, as far over as I could from this lady and her pet sheep. And yet it didn't work. I was as quiet as I could be, but that sheep literally almost jumped into its owner's arms. Sheep get very, very skittish. But it seems like the only cure for their fright is if they have the presence of the shepherd by them. If they can even just see their shepherd near them, they will immediately lose fear because they know that somebody's watching out for them. Somebody has their back. You see, the sheep, they're smart enough to realize that of themselves, they are too weak. They are too helpless to face this threatening world. But the shepherd, he makes all the difference in their lives. And so in this psalm and the idea that it's really not about sheep, but it's about us, that we are likened with sheep. And we know perhaps better than other recent times the uncertainty of life and how much things can happen and how many things there are to be kind of afraid of. And we could list them all, but we know what they all are. And then we deal with the current thing, obvious one, the COVID and morphine and mutating, it keeps messing with us. And then there are financial concerns and job concerns and so many things to kind of throw us off keel and make us really not able to rest. It's hard to relax at night. I don't know if you noticed this, but in the early days, about this time 2 years ago, in the early days, I noticed that it seemed like every other commercial on TV was the same commercial for ADT security systems. And I thought, I've always seen them, but not that many. I'm like, they are deliberately showing more commercials to cash in on the fear that some people have. And yet the only thing that we can really count on is the shepherd. And so as his people, as the sheep of his pasture, we need to turn to him. We need to have confidence, not in ourselves, but in his care. And the true cure for what we fear rests with him. Well, also for the sheep to lie down and rest, they've got to be free from conflict among the other sheep in the fold. Now, interestingly, just like, I guess, chickens, they have a pecking order. In sheep world, there is a budding order. Like, in fact, there's this whole group of people who are called sheep sociologists. And sheep sociologists who study sheep have too much time on their hands, first of all, but they will tell us that very definitely they have identified that in each flock there is an established social order. There is a hierarchy. There is a top sheep and a bottom sheep, and each sheep in between has got to sort of maintain his territory. And once that area is obtained, then it has to maintain it. And so again, the sheep are constantly on their guard for sheep bullies, I guess, who would take their territory away, right? And here again, it's the presence of the shepherd who will protect the flock from the bullies, from the Scott Farkases of the sheep world, right? They will protect these sheep. And the sheep can rest knowing that, hey, somebody's watching out for them. Somebody's not going to let this bully take advantage of them because the shepherd is there. No need to be anxiously scanning the horizon for any new threats. The shepherd will take care of it for us. Well, we have our own sort of budding orders as well, don't we? And we know that once we establish our territory, it takes a lot of work and energy and money and everything else to maintain that. But we have our social strata. Whether it be at work or at home or at school or church or wherever, we are in the business of comparing ourselves to others and seeing where we stack compared with everybody else. And we're really consumed with that. And we know by now, hopefully, because it's been said enough times, how absolutely destructive social media is on our psychological health and our mental health. That is what social media is all about. It's about seeing where we stack up compared to the best cultivated, curated versions of everybody else on there. We want to know Like we want to know where they went on vacation or what kind of car we want to know all of this about everybody else, because then we'll be able to know kind of where we rank in this. And even if we tend to think that we rank pretty high, we still can't rest, because there's always somebody lurking to take our place. I don't know if he would remember this. This was so many years ago, but I'll never forget my dad one time telling me of a situation many, many years ago when he was interviewing a person. Now, my dad was an accountant, and he was interviewing people for, I guess, entry-level bookkeeping jobs or whatever, but he was interviewing this young lady, and she was a college graduate, and he said the interview was going fine. He said, but then she blew it. I said, well, what did she do? He said, well, we got to the end of the interview, and I was pretty impressed with her, and I was almost ready to offer the job. But I said, do you have any more questions? And this young new college graduate whipped behind the ear said, yeah, Mr. Higgins, I have one more question. She said, how long will I have to be here before I can have your job? And she didn't get the job. So not because he was so worried about her. It's just the gall, the unadulterated, gall to do that. But we want to know where we fit in. And so again, with the sheep, as with us, like we've got to get our minds more on the shepherd and off of all the other sheep if we're going to be able to find rest and sleep. Well, for the sheep to rest, they also have to be free from irritation. And this is where the good shepherd has to provide freedom from irritation. Sheep, especially in the summertime, can be driven absolutely crazy by flying pests and by all kinds of parasites. And they're terrorized by nasal flies and bot flies and ticks. And it's almost impossible for them to rest. Instead, they're up on their feet again. They're furiously shaking their heads. They're stamping their feet. They're trying to run away from this thing that's irritating them. And so it has to be the job of the diligent, faithful shepherd to do his best to remove these irritants from the sheep. And a good shepherd will do this in many different ways. A good shepherd would apply many kinds of insect repellent, and if necessary, see to it that the sheep is dipped and his fleece is cleared from ticks, and the shepherd will see to it that there is a shelter for the sheep to escape at night. And all of this is incredibly time-consuming, and as you can probably imagine, in that day and time, it was an enormous amount of work. And many shepherds, they would not go to that expense to do that, but there were some dedicated, loving shepherds that they felt it was worth it to go to all this time and trouble to make sure that their sheep were free from all of these things. Philip Keller, in his book, he comments at one point about how his farm was next to another one, and how he really went to great extremes to make sure that his farm and the grazing area and everything was very, very, lush and green, and there was plenty of water to drink. He said, however, the place next to him was not that way, and the people really didn't care about their sheep, and it was overgrazed, and it was brown, and there wasn't really clean water. And he said, literally, the sheep in that other place, they would go up to where the fence was, and they would just look out over the fence into this other place. See, not every flock of sheep is so lucky to have a shepherd who cares so intimately about them. And yet Jesus Christ, the good shepherd who knows us, he comes to us through the presence of the Holy Spirit. And when nothing else can kind of calm our minds or make us rest or free us from maybe the fear and the anxiety that we're experiencing for whatever reason, he can do that. He can do that. I don't know about you, but if left to my own without the shepherd's help, I would allow myself to kind of be driven crazy with worry and fear and anxiety. But before we can relax, we need the touch of the shepherd in our lives. Well, lastly, obviously, in order for the sheep to rest, we know this, that they've got to be free from hunger and thirst. And so David would write that he makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. That sheep, as with us, we can't rest if we're hungry. And again, the sheep, if they're hungry, they will get dangerously thin from roaming around, constantly looking for food. And the problem back then was that the places where they were raising sheep, those were places that didn't naturally have green pastures, but they were dry and brown and mountainous, like Palestine, where the writer of where David lived, or in the western U.S. You know, if you've been there, these places are hot and dry, and if left to fend for themselves, the sheep would starve to death. And so, the green pasture, the lush meadow would have been very, very unique, except if the sheep had a devoted, diligent shepherd who would make it his job to cultivate these green pastures so the sheep can relax and not starve. And so that is the obvious layer to that verse, but there's something more to it that I was made aware of this last week. The great spiritual writer Dallas Willard, who passed away some time ago. I've got so many of his books, but just always makes me think. But he pointed out that, listen, normally sheep, if they see green meadows, like they wouldn't be lying down in it. They would be eating, like they would be feeding constantly. And if they saw clear pools of water, they wouldn't just like walk beside it. They would be in it, drinking or whatever. But he said the image here is of sheep who are so, like they're so well taken care of. They're so contented. They're so well fed that they don't need to worry about getting all I can while I can, right? They just are so comfortable and confident in the shepherd's care that they can just lie down in the stuff. They don't need to always be eating. It's going to be there tomorrow. The shepherd will make sure it is. There's going to always be clean water, and so we can just lay down and rest, and we can walk by this stream, and that's only because the shepherd. Water is something else. Water is something that we know that we need to live. We cannot live very many days without water, whereas food, we could go quite a bit of time, but water is required for life. And yet we know that in most places in the world, many places in the world, water is not clean, is not drinkable, but it's oftentimes full of bacteria. And the problem with sheep is that they would for whatever reason, like they would see a cool, deep, clear pool of water, but for some reason they are usually wanted to go to the shallow water, maybe because it seemed less threatening to them, but it's in that shallow, stagnant water that was full of parasites and bugs and bacteria and all these other things. And so the shepherd would have to constantly be moving the sheep along to the clean water because of their own, they wouldn't do that. I think it's pretty interesting how, like sheep, we tend to want to quench our thirst or satisfy our hunger, not on good things, but on bad things, so to speak. We don't want to feed on God's word. We spend our time watching TV and movies and social media and all these other things. And I'm not saying that's all bad, but comparatively speaking, we spend so little time feeding on the good thing of God's word. And then there's obviously a whole other end extreme that we could go to that many people do. And yet we, of all of the sheep in the world in our country, we are so exceptionally blessed. Even in these times when it does look like the shelves are a little bare, we have abundant food like none of the world has ever known. And yet so many times we choose to put more harmful chemicals in our bodies. And again, we feed our minds with garbage and we neglect, first of all, we neglect the shepherd who is trying to lead us to things that will restore our soul and not detract from it. We are so blessed as sheep in this country. And yet we wonder, why is it that you can look at any survey or read statistics that so many people, even many Christians, could not say like David did in the Psalm, the Lord restores my soul. We wonder why don't our souls feel restored so often? I mean, we are, all statistics will tell us we are the most tired generation. We need rest and food and water. And God is our shepherd who looks out for us, who feeds us. And yet we get so busy so many times thinking we don't need him. We don't need a shepherd. I love what the wise monk once said. He was talking to somebody and the guy says, says, brother, why do I feel so tired, and why do I feel so depressed? I'm getting all the sleep I need, and I'm getting all the rest. And the wise monk said, you know what, the antidote to exhaustion and weariness is not necessarily sleep, he said, but it's wholeheartedness. See, it's wholeheartedness. That there is this connection. The Hebrew word for soul doesn't mean our disembodied spirit, but the Hebrew word for soul literally means our entire being, soul, mind, and spirit, the whole person. So David said, the Lord restores my soul. The New Living Translation says he renews my strength. The Message paraphrase says, true to your word, you let me catch my breath. I like here, though, what it says literally in the Hebrew text. It says, he enables me to lie down in grassy pastures, leads me to settled water. Then it says, he turns my life back. He turns my life back. In other words, he takes me from where I'm headed, and he turns me back around to the direction that I need to be going in. He restores my soul. He takes care of my mind, spirit, and body. He turns me back. He reorients me to where I need to be, where I need to be going, where I need to be headed, what I need to be doing. I love that, because if we're honest, we would have to say that oftentimes our experience, oftentimes the way we feel in life, especially lately, is more reflected in Psalm 42, verse 11, which, again, speaking of the soul, but this asks the question, why are you downcast, O my soul? Why are you downcast, O my soul? Well, I don't know if you have ever been downcast. Downcast is a technical term. It comes from the sheep world, a technical term for sheep who fall and they land on their backs. And sheep, when they land on their backs, they literally cannot turn themselves over. They cannot right themselves. And so what happens is they'll be laying on their backs, and then very, very quickly, their legs would start to go numb. And then they would be very fearful, so they would start to make all kinds of noise and bleed. And pretty soon they would attract the attention of the vultures and all the other animals, and they would usually be dead within a matter of just a couple of hours for the downcast sheep. So it was always one of the most important jobs of that shepherd, to be on the lookout for downcast sheep. And in fact, the New Testament will put it this way, that our good shepherd, he'll leave the 99 to go search for the one. Why are you downcast, O my soul? And I think when we feel like we're downcast, when we can't just take naps, or we can't just take a vacation, or we can't buy things to restore us, we need the shepherd to find us, to rescue us, to love us, to provide for us, to take care of us, to lift up our downcast souls, and to rub us and love us until we are on our feet again. Because again, Psalm's really not about sheep, it's about you and I. Because we are the sheep who are easily frightened and vulnerable and skittish. We are the sheep who are in constant need of protection and guidance and sustenance. And I don't care who you are. I don't care if you're a man or a woman, or rich or poor, or educated or not educated, or big and strong or wimpy. I don't care who you are. There's always going to come a point in your life when you recognize, I need the shepherd. See, it'd be a lot better if you spent most of your life, if you spent all of your life walking with the shepherd, depending on the shepherd, instead of just waiting till the end when you're kind of downcast and upturned and you don't know where to turn and you don't know what to do, and you feel like maybe your days are going to end any moment, but you haven't built that relationship, you haven't walked closely with the shepherd, so you don't, not only don't you know if he's there, but you don't know if he is there, if you can trust him. And so how much better to say, the Lord is my shepherd. I have everything I need. Doesn't matter what happens to me, because he's going to give me rest. He's going to make me lie down in green pastures. He's going to lead me beside quiet water. Those two things that we need for life itself, he is going to provide it, and only him. And when we have that sense, then we can say with David those words from long ago, that you, Lord, are my shepherd, and I shall not want. You make me lie down in green pastures. You lead me beside quiet, cool, clean water. And Lord, you and you alone restore my soul. Stated so well in the great hymn, Savior, like a shepherd lead us, much we need thy tender care. And like I said, I don't care who you are or what your situation is or how strong you think you are or how you need the shepherd in your life. And you might not think you do, but you do. And I guarantee you that one point in your life you're going to know that. And so if you have not responded to the call of the Good Shepherd on your life, who wants you to be a part of his flock, who wants you to be one of the incredibly fortunate sheep of his pasture, whom he takes care of, then you need to do that. If you're here this morning, or maybe you're watching online, you've not been baptized, you've never made that confession of faith that yes, I believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God, and I want him to be the shepherd of my soul. You need to do that.